Fortbase is part of a generation of tools. It's really built to make cybersecurity easier. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of MSP Cyber Roundtable. We got Frank and Frank here. This is going to be a little bit fun. So we're going to be Frank R and Frank G. How do you guys refer to each other?
That's about it.
Okay.
Yeah, it is that way.
The way to do it.
Yeah,
All right.
basically somebody says either an R or a G, or someone says nothing, and then we're just confused the whole time. That's
Well,
how it
or
goes.
we guess who it was meant for.
We guess, right?
So the Franks hail from IGI, supporting Nodeware, and some other great cyber stuff. And we're going to be talking more about that a little later. And you guys have a new podcast, which we'll talk about later as well. Frank, first time on the show. So say hi to everyone and tell us, how did you land in cyber? Because that's, of course, the first question I ask every guest. How did you land in this space? What brought you into your, how did you get into, I don't know if you went straight to cyber, you went through IT. How did you get there? What was it like? Tell us a little story here.
And that's meant for Frank G, because I've been on your show before.
Oh yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
Frank
for
G.
sure.
I gotta.
So this is where we take the crystal ball and we figure out which Frank we're talking
Sorry.
about. So no worries. Thanks, Matthew. I really appreciate it. So you can probably see in my background, started actually my career in the military, so U.S. Army, satellite communications, and super great time. Learned a ton. I came out of the military and I went directly to work for a company some people will remember called Covad Communications. It's hard to say sometimes now with COVID being so close to how it was.
Covad.
I know. I have to really spell it out. But they were one of the first high-speed internet DSL companies back in 1997 that came out of the Telecom Act of 1996. And so I was there 4 years, startup company, kind of learned a lot about growth and business going through that process. At that point, that's when the
slow
bust.
down.
Yeah.
People love stories like this, the history stories. Sure. So this was when they disaggregated the last mile, right? There was some regulation about that. And So you guys got in there, and this is a funny thing because we went back the other direction again, right?
Yeah.
But for a period of time, if you strung cables to a building, to a house, down a neighborhood, you had to open that up, right? And you guys really made a whole business out of that, right?
Yeah, took advantage of that entire kind of mindset and legislation really that allowed that to happen, which opened it up. It deregulated, right, the Bell system at the time, and allowed for many companies to come in and start to do what we saw happen, in communications, which is allowed high-speed internet to get away from the Bell system. And man, it was pretty thrilling in 1997 to have a 1.5 megabyte connection in my house. So that was pretty cool. I know it sounds like, not very advanced now, but you don't, if you're one of the young bucks out there listening, that was really something, because, everybody else was on dial-up at the time. So yeah, but it's super exciting time. You're right. And as I said, I learned a ton about that. But yeah, we would colo in the actual, here in California, it was Pacific Bell, in their locations. You would have equipment inside there tied to, their networks, which was really interesting for sure. So yeah, I mean, I left there right at the dot-com bust when everything was kind of getting hit. And I ended up moving to Bakersfield, California, which, not a lot of people knew about back then. But I read an article on the best bang for your buck cities in America. And I happened to own a house up in the Bay Area. I sold that, and we bought a house in Bakersfield for a sixth of the cost, right? Built a brand new house there, and I ended up, man, I was driving down the road. I was actually commuting to the Bay Area working for DirecTV Broadband at the time. I saw a billboard for a company called Arc Technology. I ended up going over and interviewing over there, and met a guy named Alex Rogers there, and him and I hit it off. And at the time, it's when managed services was really just first starting or being thought about. And Alex went to a conference at the time, and he saw what was happening in the industry and said, "We got to do that." And I was kind of the sales guy at the time, and we started doing managed services, and we were being really successful with it. I created
So wait,
a
when is this?
so this is back in about, I started there in 2003, so consider it probably about 2004 2005 timeframe.
Yeah, and
And
at that, well, was it called managed services at that time? That was right around the conversion moment, right?
Yeah, it really, so we got hooked up with a company called MSPU, which was Managed Service Provider University, and they were doing a lot of training at the time around this concept of managed services. And that's, where that name kind of, I don't know where it came from specifically, was built, but that is exactly the concept at that time was happening. You had guys like Level Platforms, if you remember, those were one of the first managed service like PSA tools at the time. And so we kind of started in that. Before that, we were on gosh, what was Tiger Paw, right? If you can remember
Oh
that.
yeah,
Um,
that's still around. Do you know this?
yeah, yeah. So Tiger Paw is still
It's,
around. And eventually we ended up moving to ConnectWise as well. So that was something that ended up happening. But where this story is going is really, I sold about $3 million in managed service contracts, was being very successful with this model. And I built a configuration tool for myself really to price managed services. And the MSP, you guys saw this pricing tool, said, "Wow, you guys have something here. Not only do you have this amazing tool, but you guys are doing it all the right way." And so they told us, "You guys are going to be a training organization." And that's really where a company called Chartech started was, and Chartech is still around as a MSP training organization. Um, and so, really I was an integral part of creating that, and then training other MSPs on how to be MSPs at the time. And I was there until 2011. Um, and at that point, we just kind of went different directions. And that's when I started going down the vendor route. So we had built something really interesting in Chartech in that we were doing hardware as a service, which was not something anybody was doing at the time. And that really is what we're training on people on, not only how to bring together a managed service solution, but put that in a all-inclusive, all-you-can-eat with hardware kind of
well, that was
solution.
a big deal. That was a big deal at
Yep.
the time because the cloud wasn't there, and it was finance with your bank, right?
Yep.
Or
And
or or nothing, right? If you needed something, you had
yeah,
to
exactly.
stump up the dollars.
Exactly. And then it was about kind of creating this story about how to sell that, right? So how do you sell that to somebody? And we created this way of like making it so easy and understandable for, the IT guys who normally are talking tech speak and geek talk and all that stuff, and really putting it into a story that you could tell that the client would understand. And it made it very easy to understand how to sell all you can eat services, basically, including managed services, including hardware. And Arc Chartech provided that hardware to other MSPs. So that was another area that we did. And the other thing we brought into there, which is kind of how I moved into my next step of vendors, was we brought together a whole number of vendors at the time, folks like, you probably remember Reflection on the email front, and Exchange Defender and folks like that, where we would provide those pieces of software to our MSP partners as well. And we'd take a little cut of it and provide that to them. So we were almost creating like a mini PAX 8 back then, which was really interesting, but just not at the level, obviously, that it's gone. So that moved me into vendor side. And so moving ahead now, about 3 years ago, I decided cybersecurity was really the next step for managed services and for the MSP channel. And that's when I really started looking at, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? I was doing website marketing with a company called Vertical Action for 8 years, helped grow that business. But, where was the next thing that at managed services was going? And it's obvious it's cyber, right? And it was obvious at the time, as we saw more and more companies come into the event space and all of that this is where we're going. And I think it leads great into what we're going to be talking about, and that's what led me here to Nodeware. And Matthew Koenig, who I've known for some time, him and I were friends, and that's kind of how I ended up where I'm at.
Well, that's I thank you for that story. I love.
Don't blame it all on Matthew, though. That other Matthew.
I loved hearing that story. I'm sure other people have and will as well. I got so many questions, but I think you're right. Cyber is clearly the driving force behind investment in managed services right now. And if you rewind not so many years ago, security spending was a bit speculative, right? People were selling and buying based on fear, sort of randomly, right? And the revenue was not super predictable. The profit models weren't really worked out. I think it's clearly here to stay, and it's a major. Not only is it a major portion of an engagement, but it also sort of steers or wraps the overall service engagement now. And people are now starting to speculate. There's a lot of noise about AI, right? But it's not really clear at all right now. Even though there's a lot of end client excitement, how do you turn that into a business? Is there even a business? Is there any value? Who knows, right? Who knows when or how? But clearly, wrapping services around those cyber engagements, or the way I sort of look at it is wrapping cyber around the service engagements from a sales perspective, is where we're at right now, right?
I 100% agree with that. I mean, that it's interesting. When we talk about managed services and cyber and seeing it over these years, I mean, I continue to say it's an evolution, right? Because at the end of the day, managed services was fairly stagnant for a good 10 years. I mean, this is the model. This is what you do. These are the tool set that you use for the most part. Well, and then here's all the vendors that fit into that set, right? But what we're seeing now is something that can really change that model and put you in a different position. So when I say that, what I mean by it, Matthew, is like, most MSPs live in the world of small business, right? So you're talking about 50 or less computer endpoints that they're going to be taking care of. And for most, it's a lot less than that, at 25 or less. Cybersecurity in itself can push an MSP into a whole new opportunity, because whether you have an IT department or not at a larger organization, the need is there for additional help in cyber. And so this can allow more co-managed opportunities, more larger engagements, that sort of thing, which has not been the life of the MSP for all of these years. So, as we talk about evolution and where things are going, especially in 2025 and beyond, I think that's the evolution we're starting to see, and the opportunity that most MSPs should be looking at as we move forward.
Well, and I'll just add a little bit in there. I apologize for my camera decided to die, so I'm going to do a perfect cut in the background. But no, it's interesting. Just the quick synopsis of my history that I think kind of relates in is that I was very much of a hardware guy, big company, Intel, way back when, worked at Apple, and then did kind of came into the MSP and I've always been partner related for the last 30 years or so, but MSP specifically, as they merged, I used to deal with a lot of system builders, right? And that was kind of there was a world of them, right? There was thousands and thousands of people building systems because they could, and that morphed into branded, which morphed into, break fix on the other people's systems, and then ultimately, the managed service in that, and then now this play on security and managed security. And it's an interesting play because I think it, again, you look at some of the shows over the last year, right? Probably, that whether it's ConnectWise Connect or IT Nation Connect or smaller shows, it's 80+% of the vendors and the sponsors involved are security related, or they're saying they're security related, and they may or may not be directly. So there's been sort of this overwhelming, I guess, the rush of options for an MSP, right? To look at and to pick on and to take on something. And some of it they took on just, okay, I'll just add this and I'll figure it out later because one of my customers I know needs it. And so what I've been seeing, and I think Frank has seen, and Matthew, you probably have as well, is the sort of okay, let's pause a moment, right? Let's make sure we know what we need. What our customers need, and then on top of it, which is kind of a whole other issue that we could probably have an whole hour on, that you're very familiar with, Frank or Matthew, is the whole compliance and cyber insurance and sort of the requirements that they're pushing, which kind of tends to narrow it down. It sort of makes things a little bit more specific. And so I think, kind of back to our topic of, or the headline here, what does it mean to be an MSP in 2025, and what we're going to be talking about in our podcast and other things is, it really comes down to being core to your customers, right? It's basic business 101. Listen to what your customers are needing, be able to answer their objections because they always are going to have them. And that was, I think it's what you were talking about, Frank, right? Sort of as a, used to do backup disaster recovery and maybe some Office 365 and oh, now you want me? I thought you were already taking care of my cyber. Isn't my antivirus enough? Right. So that evolution is something that we really are seeing, and I think is interesting. That Matthew, our colleague Koenig, has gone to a number of shows this last year and talked about how to sell cyber, and we have packed rooms because even though people are in there and they're in the business and in the section, they're still figuring out what it really means and how to overcome those objections, right? I thought you were already doing this, and vulnerability management is a huge particular element.
I feel constantly at conflict here, Frank, and I imagine you do a little bit as well because I'm in vendor space, right? But I'm a cyber guy, and if I was to tell someone what cyber they needed 10 years ago, I would probably give a slightly different answer. But today it's really clear. It's pick up a standard. Look at the standard. The standards are going to take care of all your regulatory needs. Look at that. We got video. All your regulatory needs.
Hey.
They're going to take care of all your, insurance requirements to get insurance. They're going to cover your reasonable expectation of due diligence, due care, right? Which you need to do at an executive level. And it's going to take care of your risk, and that's what organizations should be looking at. And it's different for different businesses: size, complexity. Do they have sensitive data, right? What's the criticality? You need advisory in there to make that guidance. The conflict I have, and you may also have this, is actually it's really easy for you and me because the standards say you need to do this thing, and that happens to be in my product space. You happen to be, again, in one of those things that the standards are really clear about. You have to do this thing, right? But there's a whole, you were just talking about it. Like you go to a trade show, there's 100 vendors there, right? 80 of them are cyber. But when you look at the standards, and then you look at what the vendors do, right? There's a whole bunch of vendors there that are selling stuff that's not in any of the standards. And I think when you look at, I want to create a service engagement for a client, right? It's the value delivery is safety, security, right? And really, even though I'm a vendor, I have to tell my partners, don't listen to vendors. Go look at the standards, go look at the industry requirements. People have already figured this out. Smart people that aren't vendors, go listen to them, just do the things. And when you look at that list, it describes all the stuff that makes a good managed service provider, right? It's
Yeah. No, the pieces are there, and they're clear enough. Again, I like your sort of thought process of, go understand go understand HIPAA. If you got a lot of medical clients, really understand HIPAA from the technology standpoint, not from the privacy. I mean, you need to know the privacy and the rest of the rules involved, but find out what they're really asking for. We just saw there was in New York, the new requirement
the new hospital rule.
I forget the specific. Yeah, and was it hospital? There was a broader category.
It's health systems and hospitals. Yeah, if you're over a certain size, there's all these new requirements in New York. It's sort of a big deal.
Yeah, and there's things like call it vulnerability management, right, and MFA and different things like that are pretty clear. And I feel sorry for the MSP on kind of to your point of you might have one tool, one vendor that has 3 of the 5 things, and somebody else has the other 2 of the 5, and then you got somebody that's got 1 of them, and then so picking and choosing and understanding where you need to go. And that's kind of been a lot of our approach from the Nodeware world, is that we're staying very focused on what we need to do, right, and what the requirement is. It's vulnerability management, continuous vulnerability management. And there's other tools like yours that we can put the data into that can make the reporting, or there's things like Agile Blue that does the SOC and sort of takes the data and do it. So it's I don't know where I'm going there necessarily, but there is a lot of complications, and that's what it means to be an MSP in 2025 is probably still a bit more confusion, right? There's still
that's exactly where I was going to go to, Frank. Man, the confusion in the industry right now is it's really a huge issue, because everybody's educating in different ways or trying to educate in different ways. And a lot of the education comes from vendors. And so it's specific around whatever, that vendor is wanting somebody to be educated around. And with all of that, I was telling my story, and, the parallels in where we're at in the industry from the cybersecurity perspective, to me, it's very similar to where the industry was when that transition to managed services was happening. People didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what tools to bring together. You didn't know, how to pull it all together and do what you needed to do. And then there's compliance, and then there's this, right? What is all of this stuff, and how do you bring it together, and what should you be doing, to your point, Matthew, as a standard for every single one of your clients? And the reality is that standard has changed, right? That standard is no longer what you traditionally did as a managed service provider for the last 10 years. Now you have to evolve that into adding additional services to cover not only compliance needs, but requirements in general, right? Because the threat is different now. So, all of these things come together to add a ton of confusion, where it's going to take us as a collective on the vendor side and everywhere, and on, everywhere, really, to educate the community on, here's what you need to be doing as a standard. Doesn't matter what tools you use by name, but they need to be this tool set, right? And I think that's what we need to do.
Well, and the service descriptions, right? The service descriptions are really also becoming the standard, right? It's not like just you need this tool. It's like you need this tool because there's a service description, right?
Right.
That's expected.
Yeah. What you need to be delivering, and
you don't get to.
But I know I saw on your I think it's your next one. You got Chris Johnson in from the newly named GTIA, Global Technology Industry Association, right? And they've that if you're struggling to understand what to do and what what some trainings are, I would definitely take a
Oh
look
yeah,
at
they've got a
that.
great library
But
of training. That's for sure.
yeah, I think they've been working for years just on the new
Uh-huh.
trust mark right around the cyber, and that there's a lot of play and there's a lot of work there. So I'm not suggesting everybody go out and do it. They're not going to be able to do it right away, but that's sort of the guiding light, right? I mean, that's your endpoint, and I think one of the things, and again, I'll just reference back to Nobler, when people roll it out, right, they see a lot of issues, right? Things come up, and a lot of vulnerabilities are found, or a lot of steps need to be taken, a lot of bad systems out there that haven't been patched in years, et cetera. And we get this concern from a lot of MSPs that say, you know what, there's just too much there. I don't know where to start. It's like, stop whining, right? It's not. You can't not do it, right? I mean, if you are truly adding to a managed service with some extra cyber in it, you're going to find things that you didn't see before, that you thought maybe somebody else was doing, or
We've
just
gotten
didn't
in
know
my
about.
practice, we've gotten really methodical over the last year with our partner base of really supporting them in analyzing their whole practice, right? What do you do that's the most secure in client one? What do you do that's the least secure in client two? How do you get client two to be like client one? What's that pathway? What's missing that you're not doing right now? Like reevaluating your stack. Like, how are you reevaluating your stack? Are you doing it sort of randomly? What's your methodology? And so we've been going through that. But when you were talking right now, I was just reminded of something that So I had a few of our channel partners on a few weeks ago here on the show, and one of the things they told me really stuck in my head. And this is, I think, particularly true in the mid market, but increasingly small business as well. They feel like they used to be like the concierge at the hotel desk, right? With their customers. That's what they used to feel like as an MSP. Like,
What
yes,
do you want today,
I've
sir?
got
Oh, here,
that.
I got that for you
Let
here.
me get that for you, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
lately, like the consensus is they feel like nightclub bouncers because the vendors are getting into their clients' inboxes, and like they're just like in triage mode vetting like this onslaught of outside services. And if you're not going to be opinionated as an MSP around the service description, someone else is going to be. I tell you that. That's where we are in 2025, I think.
Well, I think the issue
Yeah,
with
no,
that too, Matthew, is that people got away because it was used like so much. The trusted advisor, right, role got used so much that people wanted to move away from that and become something different. The reality is that's where they need to be. Like, you need to be that trusted advisor, just like if you were sitting at that desk in their office as the IT person that they trust every day to take care of the issues. And I feel like managed services got away from that mindset of like, I'm your inside IT person. Yeah, I don't live in the building, but I am that guy, right? Or I'm that team for you.
Mm-hmm.
As you get back to that, you start to see that it's so similar. All of these things that we're talking about in cyber, proactive versus reactive. Nodeware is vulnerability management. That's proactive. That's looking at things before they become an issue, right? Endpoint protection is reactive, meaning something got to the network, but it stopped it. And that's great. It did, hopefully, but it's a reactive thing. You're reacting to something that, and everybody in the managed services understands this concept because that's what managed services is about. If that, you would look at all of these alerts and boy, these computers, their storage is about to run out and I better do something about that storage or that computer is going to stop working and my client's going to be down. That's the same as a vulnerability is there on the network. I better take care of that before something gets exploited, right? So this is part of the education that I'm getting at, is like, we just need to put it two and two together for everybody and go, it's not as hard as everybody thinks. It's not as complicated as everyone's making it out to be. Are there things like VCSOs, and are there things like, compliance requirements for CMMC and for, every other framework under the sun? There is. But how do you get help with that? And do you have to be the one that has all that knowledge? The reality is, no, you don't. there's companies that you can work with that can help you do that. And that's how a lot of people transitioned into managed services. They used companies back then like Zenith Infotech and others that were kind of done for you services that allowed you to kind of get started and then take over pieces of that as you got more and more expertise or hired more people that had that expertise. And I think that's where we're going or need to go, with a lot of the MSPs who just don't know where to start, right? Or it's just all noise at this point because it's not going to go away. You got to do something. So what do you do, right?
So you guys have been pushing this nodeware cart for actually I should rewind a little bit. Should we talk about where the product came from, because it wasn't originally for sale on the channel, right?
No, it's actually the product's been around. Let's see, probably 7+ years now, right? So our services side of the business, where we do penetration testing and CISO or vCISO and risk assessments and third-party risk management, they were using a sort of a traditional vulnerability tool in their mix as part of the rollouts and part of their activities. And so they were realizing, one, it was expensive, and two, it was burdensome and costly and just bad to work with. So they said, wait, we can do this ourselves. Let's build it rather than buy it. So they built it, 7+ years ago with the interest of building it out there. It's been a part of the services package, and then I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, they kind of started rolling it out to some channel partners. In addition, added Synex's distribution, have done, been around in that world for a bit. But really, the last 2-3 years is when we've kind of really done a full channel launch, where I came on, Matthew Kondo came on, now Frank in the last couple months. So, we are, for Nodeware specifically today, we're channel partner only. We don't sell it direct to any end users. We really kind of kept that true to it. And my focus in particular has been working with other partners like yourselves, and like the other compliance tools and other integration tools that can use the data, partner with make a better solution for the MSPs. So it's been around, as I said, 7+ years as a product. We've added, we keep adding to it. It's a SaaS product, so it's easy. Things just appear. Like we just added a few weeks ago an EPSS scoring details and prioritizations, and some details within that of once you see it within one system, and you see a critical vulnerability with it's being exploited now,
Yeah.
be prepared kind of message. We also give you the other systems in your network that have it that you need to go work on. So we're improving that. We're improving some other tools. So
well, and this is
first
of all, I was really excited to see you guys come on the scene. I've been in the vulnerability management space as a user for 20 years, and there's been some ups and downs, and there was actually a period a few years ago where it was a little troubling because the space contracted and a bunch of vendors just straight went away, and there were there's data out there that's incomplete. There's tools out there that are incomplete, right? There's a couple of vendors out there that are really not good fits for the channel, right? The solution you guys have put together it's really important that it exists here, it's really great to be in partnership. I'm curious, how are you seeing service providers? Like, what's different today, or let's call it like late 2024, right? Because we're in January, with how people are utilizing your tool set versus when you sort of arrived in the channel, and people, like, really, if I rewind 3 years ago, I remember like talking to service provider after service provider that just sort of like, they either scratched their head when I asked about vulnerability management. They're like, you mean like missing patches? Or they would say, well, we scanned with Tenable last year, right?
Yeah. Well, that you're on the track I was going to answer, which is simplistically, and I've been doing a lot of education around this, trying to be product agnostic, but looking at assessment versus management, right? I think 2 years ago plus, people looked at a tool like Tenable or other vulnerability tools, and it was a checkbox, right? I need to do once a year. I need to show that I've done a vulnerability assessment. I know what my inventory is and what kind of risks are on it. Boom, once, done once, and I'll check the box again in a year. And over the last year to two, people, partly because of the standards, right? Because of the CIS requirements, or in Australia, the Essential 8, or GDPR and other places, all of them are starting to really call out vulnerability management, which means...
And they describe it, right? They don't just say you get to buy a tool that says VM on it, right? They describe the practices.
Right. And the biggest piece that's been a benefit to the educational process is that it says, at least, the weakest standards are saying at least weekly, right? It means that's their continuous, and that's their management, is that they're doing it at least once a week. We think that's not even enough, because if you do it on a Sunday and that vulnerability comes out on Tuesday, you're missing it for a whole week before you know if you got it.
If you just look at the title, like, it says weekly, right? But then if you look at the backstory on some of these standards and requirements, you realize, well, yeah, it's theoretically weekly, but inside that week, you're supposed to scan the thing, discover a thing if it's discoverable, figure out what you're going to do about it, and then go do it. And the fix may be hard, right? Or whatever the response is might be hard, right? That's, if you're only scanning once a week, like, what are you going to do that all in 15 minutes? You have to.
Yeah. No, that's a big part. And I guess if we take it a little bit higher level, right? A lot of the standards that are calling out vulnerability are also calling out other proactive elements, right? It's the big things that came out 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when MSPs were starting to really get into cyber, was MDR, XDR, SIM, right? Kind of the fix it things, let's call it, right? So where we fit, both from Nodeware as well as the services, and where an MSP really has to be looking much more aggressively at this year, is being on the proactive game. And let's call it cyber hygiene for your something that your customers can understand and get at, and sort of I need to take care of my teeth, I need to go for that walk, I need to it's all the things that are trying to prevent the risk of failure or exploitation. And that's really where, if an MSP needed to change something or needed to add something to their mix, I would wholeheartedly put it around the proactive approach. It could be vulnerability management from us, could be MFA, could be email security awareness training, right? That's an easiest one out there. That's where most problems are at. But there's a lot of MSPs still aren't even offering that.
It's not just that it's proactive, right? Because you can be proactive with a tool, set and forget and ignore. But it's also operationalizing it, right? It's not just a machine you turn on and you forget about. Your people need to be engaged, and you need a suite of tools that even makes that possible to be repeatable in an operational way, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think we mentioned it before is that when people started rolling out Nodeware or other tools, they're front of, oh gosh, I found all these things I got to do, I'm overwhelmed. So we're actually working with a support organization called Helped that is going to offer out packages of, whether it's blocks of hours or ongoing retainer type of things, where I got to do my core stuff, but I know I need to do a monthly or a daily look at my customers and see if anything new popped up that needs remediation. So I'm going to put it aside. I'm going to have somebody else do it for me. And you got to build it into your cost, of course. It's not just a adder thing, but the value add that MSP is doing with that point, right, is truly being, I think, revolutionary for their customers in terms of the just truly continuous lookups, remediation, and risk avoidance.
It's not this isn't patch management we're talking about, right? And one of the things about what makes vulnerability management different than patch management, and I'm not talking security theory or risk, I'm talking about operationally, is when you do a vulnerability analysis, what you find is that, here's a pile of vulnerabilities, but there's some underlying root causes that are a little more complex than I need to apply a patch, right? You're gonna
Right.
surface
Oh yeah.
things that need to be taken care of operationally, like upgrading Windows, or like maybe it's your upgrade
Right.
schedule. I was interacting with a car dealership recently, and at the end of every night, they turn off their machines and lights out. And not even every night. Like sometimes when the sales guys walk away, they don't want to leave those machines on the floor, right? Where customers are walking around. So, sometimes automated patching, like you might think you have all your policies in place, right? But you really need to do the vulnerability analysis to see how is that other thing working, right? So one of the things I've seen it
Yeah.
in that vulnerability analysis is it's like this lens on everything else you do as an MSP, right? Like how how are you doing,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Well, and that's actually a perfect lead on to what I was thinking about. Right, there's another element, and this goes into the services role with the penetration test. Right, penetration tests. You can do all the vulnerability preparedness you want, right, and that's obviously we recommend that, and it's a required element. But that's kind of getting the troops ready, right? That's preparing yourself for the doctor's office visit with eating less and working out more and doing whatever the stuff. But the penetration test puts that plan to the test, right? From an truly outside perspective. And, it can't be the MSP doing it themselves. It has to, doesn't have to be, but it needs to be. And in most cases, required to be an outside third party, because you don't know that you might have patched these 4 systems that work together, but when you didn't patch, you didn't know that when something happened on this one, it can get to that. When it gets to that, it means it can get to that. So those interreliances are what can be discovered in a penetration test. And you don't need to do them as often, right? It's a once a year, maybe twice a year, depending on your world and your customer's world. But these two together, right, is really the huge 1-2 punch. And it's not something that an MSP can do on their own or shouldn't do on their own. So, you don't have to do the work. You just have to sell the customer on that. You know what? Don't you need a penetration test? Yes, I do. Yeah, I've heard about that. Let me get a
I've got
provider that
a
can do it for you.
I've got a partner that does that. They're an MSP and they do penetration tests, but they don't do penetration tests on their own clients. Right? They only do penetration tests on other people's clients.
Oh yeah.
And that's
Which is
smart.
it's a fun thing as an MSP when you get to put that hat on. But that's a great way
Yeah, I
to do
think,
it, right?
and that's what
Yeah.
Frank's been kind of talking about is it turns that lens onto you, and you're seeing all this stuff, and do I really want to deal? Do I have time to deal with that? But that's where this evolution is coming. Is like you don't have to do it all yourself, but it needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
So how do we add these different additional layers, and whether those are third party outsourced or not, that's how you evolve. And at some point, then you hire your own people, to grow your own business potentially. But I think everything's become very streamlined, right? And you have a lot of MSPs that have streamlined the entire process to have the most minimal amount of employees, with making the most profit they can. And that's what's hard to dive away from or move away from, and go back and go, now I'm going to be less efficient because I have to hire out this piece and do that. But I think that's where it has to go.
All right, you guys. We got 15 minutes. You guys want to talk about the Frank show?
Yeah, perfect. So we are launching Frankly Speaking, right? You've got Frank's here. Let's talk frankly. So we are going to have a monthly topic and different special guests, kind of similar to this, where we're kind of just talking through ideas and discussions and requirements. And so we're starting off next Wednesday at 1 with kind of along the same lines of what does it mean to be an MSP? It's kind of once you've defined that for yourself, how do you accelerate growth? with services around cybersecurity. We talked about just a minute ago the pen tests and third-party risk management, which is a new. I don't want to use the word up and coming, but it's basically a new requirement that's coming on strongly for third-party risk management. So things like that of what how you might approach it, and then we'll have other topics in about adding services without adding headcount, things like that. So we're gonna give it a try and see what we can
as
help
many
MSPs
as many things as people are looking to have further knowledge on in the cyber compliance managed service world is what we're doing with as many Frank puns as possible. That's what we're looking for.
All right, I'm gonna add on to a pitch here for you guys, okay? Because I think first of all, I love the lens, okay, around how cyber should be a growth driver. That's the right way to look at it. That's the industry's growing through cyber, right? So if your practice isn't growing through cyber, you're out of alignment with the industry. And one really interesting thing that I'm not sure that all MSPs know, but and I'm generally speaking advanced cybersecurity services. When I say advanced cybersecurity service, what I mean is a service description, right, that matches the things you're supposed to do in cyber, not just installing EDR, right?
Right.
Those services are higher margin for an MSP than password resets, right? Than the other types of help desky type things that are sometimes people's core, right? And um, that increased margin, it's maybe 5%, maybe it's 10%, like whatever that extra gross margin is there. It might not seem like a lot, but it's the difference between an organization that can fund growth activities like marketing, like that extra sales headcount, right? And actually really be able to grow into a more mature organization, and the organizations that can't, right? Because if you can't find that 5 or 10%, right, in your practice, how are you going to fuel growth, right? Growth doesn't happen magically. You have to invest, right? I love that frame, and I can't wait to be a listener. Maybe a guest.
Yeah, for sure. And what
Absolutely.
you were talking about is, I think that's kind of where I was going earlier with the opportunity, right? The opportunity is so much bigger than people understand, because now you can move into that medium or larger space, even up to enterprise, really, where an MSP can be a helping hand in cybersecurity for those different types of organizations. Yeah, maybe not enterprise, but medium for sure, right? As you kind of move up the ladder a little bit. And as you said, the margins are so much better and so much different for specific services that you could be providing. So, just going back to what Frank was saying, pen testing and vendor risk management and all of these different, assessment, things like that are very specific key services that are needed for specific compliance requirements that you can bring together and either bundle or separate as individual offerings, which the opportunity to grow your revenue in 2025 and beyond is pretty significant in this space.
So I can't wait for that. And our first episode's January 15th. And this is, where are we going to go find this?
We can. I thought we had the early.
Drop it in the chat. I'll throw it up.
You can find it. Okay. Yeah. So you can find it on. We've got a posting on LinkedIn. You can go to our nodeware.com events location and sign up there. Actually, we need a registration, or at least there's information there on the time and the,
all
and the
right.
link. So
love
to have you.
We'll leave that up there for just a moment here. And while that's happening, I wanna touch base on what's happening over at. And I'm gonna have a little bit of trouble here with my lexicon, because I have to remove CompTIA, right, and insert GTIA.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
Next week, we've got a visitor from GTIA, and we're going to be talking about what's new in compliance. Probably going to be talking about the GTIA transition. Um, you know, this was we had was it about 2 months ago the CompTIA made a public announcement about
Yeah. Was that after an
yeah,
IT
at
Nation?
IT
Yeah.
Nation, and then this week the brand and the properties were unveiled, and it's official now. So CompTIA has gone left, and GTIA has gone right. GTIA being the trade association side that they own the trust mark, right? They own the old CompTIA community. They own all the solution member research about how to build a great MSP, right? And then the individual technology skills training has gone on to Tama Bravo with the CompTIA brand. So it's official now, and I'm going to try to keep remembering not to say the word CompTIA, but we're going to say the trade association formerly known as CompTIA,
With the
something like
symbol.
that.
Right.
But I just wanted to call out congrats to Frank, who gets to take a chair position through this transition moment in one of the committees. Um, Tell us about what your focus is going to be this year. Or do you not know yet?
Well, no, we kind of do. So the group it's called the Member Champion. So we were affectionately calling it, when it kind of started up last year, was the Old Farts Club, because it was people that have been around for a long time, had been in a previous leadership role in a council or a community, and kind of rolled off, but we wanted to stay involved and active. So the Member Champions is kind of working towards kind of helping bridge the gap between different communities, and kind of being advisory to them. And we've got a ton of years of experience in the group, and so we're gonna figure out what we're gonna do a little bit during the next month or two, and kind of try to line it up with the new GTIA, objectives and mission, and as they kind of develop that out, we're going to be kind of a good sounding board for them. And basically the overall goal, whether it's our particular group or the broad GTIA, is it's the community, right? It's the village. It takes a village mentality and efforts. And again, I've been involved in it for 20 plus years, one way or the other. And it's a unique environment to come into a meeting, and you've got your competitors, you've got your customers and your prospective customers, and you've got other worlds of people in the same room talking for the betterment of all. And that's really
I think I like to think of it as our town square in our industry here, in the technology industry. There's some other places where public discourse is happening and where vendors are meeting, but it's really the largest one, the default one, maybe perhaps the most neutral territory to go interact. I feel like my membership's really valuable. I guess I'm a GTIA member now.
Yep. You are.
Whether
you want
that's I'm going to be meeting up with Chris Johnson next week. He's going to come on the show. We're going to talk about all the new compliance things. And I said to Chris, let's just talk about the new compliance things in 2025. And he was just like, he's sweating. He's like, there's so much. So we're going to be
changes.
we're going to be talking about some of those. And he's right. We got a lot of things coming up here. So with that, thanks for joining, guys. And
yeah, absolutely.
No, thank you, Matt.
I can't wait to.
Hopefully, we'll see our people next Wednesday on the.
I can't wait to check that out and have you guys back in a few months. Sound good?
All right. We appreciate it, Matthew. Good. Thanks so much.
Yeah, perfect.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you guys later.